Hey, coming up on June 17, there is a terrific event happening in Toowoomba that'd be well worth getting along to. It's happening at the annex of the Toowoomba City Hall, and it's called Hidden Abilities, a performance with a difference. And the difference is that everyone performing or speaking at this event, right down to the people selling you the food and bringing you your drinks, and everyone involved has a disability of some sort or another, but they've all, in their own way, risen above it, put it behind them, haven't let it be a setback that has curtailed their dreams. It's going to be a really inspiring afternoon, well worth getting along to, if for nothing else, to hear my next guest. Tom Nash is a fascinating gentleman to sit down and have a yarn with. At the age of 19, Tom lost both his hands and both of his legs to a deadly disease. That age where most people are just looking at life in front of them and thinking, wow, I could do anything, I could go anywhere. Since then, though, he's rebuilt his life. It's one thing to survive a life-threatening illness. It's another completely to thrive after it. But that's what Tom's done. These days he mesmerises audiences around the world as an in-demand public speaker. He's a music DJ, and he does amazing things with his life. He's the guest speaker at the Hidden Abilities event. Tom Nash, good morning. Welcome. Such a pleasure to have a chat to you.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Tom, yours is seems to be a classic tale of turning adversity into motivation and almost using that as a springboard to achieve things. And that's what I want to focus on with you today. But I'm curious, just to start with, how much of this philosophy and attitude was in you before, when you were 19, before you lost your hands and your legs to disease and your life changed forever? Were you always like this?
I don't think I was. It's first of all, it's difficult for me to remember back that far, as you might appreciate.
Sure.
But at the same time, I don't think I'd been afforded enough time to really be that self-reflective. And certainly, I think adversity is one of those things that does build character. And you can look back upon it in several different ways. And I think I've just made the choice to look back on it in a positive light and use it to create an anti-fragile atmosphere, is what I like to describe myself as, an anti-fragile person, which is not exactly resilient. Resilient would be the middle path, but not fragile, not resilient, but anti-fragile in the sense that you can use those negative vicissitudes to get stronger throughout adversity.
Right. Okay. So anti-fragile being more extreme than resilient. It's the polar opposite to being broken by circumstances.
Yeah, that's right. So something that benefits from disorder or stresses would be described as anti-fragile. I didn't coin that term, by the way.
Yeah.
It's actually made up by a guy called Nicholas Taleb, but he often talks about it in the context of ecosystems or economies or ecology and stuff like that. But if you think about it, our muscular system is anti-fragile. You put stresses on it, you lift weights, you get stronger. Airlines are kind of anti-fragile as well, in that as a system, each flight you take gets safer after a crash because of all of the different regulations that are in situ after something like that happens.
Sure.
And so I like to take that knowledge or that wisdom and kind of apply it to my personal life, in a sense that, how can I use framing techniques and all sorts of things like this, and managing of expectations and adaptation, to be able to use adversity to my advantage.
So immediately after you had the operation, or I presume it was a series of operations, and this was your scenario, was there a spark that made you start thinking like this? Because I presume you're only human. There must have been a period of mourning and possibly some self-pity, which would be entirely expected and forgivable. But what was the impetus for you to start to think the way that you now have become famous for?
Well, I think it's a kind of sink or swim situation, and each have positive feedback loops, the sink or the swim. So if you were to wallow in too much self-pity, I mean, I think we know where that leads us. But obviously the converse of that is true to be a positive feedback loop as well. And I think these are just skills that you develop to just get better and better. And the better you develop those skills, the better you get at them and the better you manage challenges. To answer the question about whether that was kind of a light bulb moment for me, the answer would be no. It was very much an iterative process. And yes, in the beginning, when I was in quite a lot of physical pain and also trying to regain independence and losing arms and legs and things like that, it was an extremely stressful period, I guess, physically and mentally. But I noticed that, with small improvements and small changes, I would get better and better. And that eventually I got to a point where I regained my independence. I was walking again. I was using hooks, instead of hands. And then it was just a case of building on that and being able to learn what I learned from overcoming those challenges.
Because I was gonna ask you how significant were the opportunities that your prosthetic, it's prosthetic technology, I guess you could call it. I mean, it's not limbs. You've got hooks, but I presume that you went through a period of trying things out as well.
Yes.
How significant were the gains that you made there to helping you, perpetuate that? I guess with your
Yeah,
attitude.
that's a good question. Well, I mean, the first iteration of a prosthetic hand that I got did look like a hand. Well, I mean, let me clarify that. It attempted to look like a hand. I thought it looked pretty awful, to be honest with you. But not only that, I realized that it was quite cumbersome in the mechanics, and you couldn't really get much fine motor skills with it. And it was also really heavy. And not having elbows, I had to have like a mechanical elbow. So lifting the thing to my face was was ridiculously inconvenient. And so I quickly started searching for alternatives. And I kind of feel that way about a lot of things these days, which is that if it carries too much dead weight, if it's too much to carry, get rid of it. I
Right.
like to be like a light traveler.
Yeah.
I'm light on my technologies. I try to simplify everything that I do. And I try, when adapting to environments, to make sure that I'm not making the environment adapt to me too much. Because I think adapting to your environment is more of a skill to actually garner than the other way around, because your skills and limitations are something that are translatable, but your environment is always transient. So it's always better to push those limits as far as you can.
So, what's an example of that, though? You adapting to the environment rather than making the environment adapt to you?
Well, an example I'd give would be, when you have a disability, a lot of the times you'll be sent an occupational therapist into your house to try and make adaptations to basic household utilities or applications. And sometimes these things are necessary. With me, I try to limit those things. So an example would be, it doesn't look like you're going to be able to hold a kettle. So we're going to give you this kettle that you don't have to hold. Or that just disperses hot water like an urn or something like that.
Right.
And I instinctively knew that I didn't want that. I wanted to try and hold the kettle, and I want to try to be able to hold any kettle. That's the point. So if I go to a friend's place, or if I travel somewhere, or if I'm in a hotel, or whatever it is, I'd rather push the limits of my skills rather than have things adapt to me, if that makes sense.
So you don't like to be comfortable, and I don't mean as in you don't seek out pain and inconvenience, but
I don't like to
in
be
a way
comfortable.
you do, though, don't you?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, no, that's not entirely true. Like, I like comfortability in the traditional sense, but I do like to push the boundaries of my limitations as much as I can, just for those purposes, I think. Yeah.
I'm curious too when you mentioned your first prosthetic was a hand which was more cumbersome and probably more of a pain than an aid as such. But I wonder, was it a big leap for you, or is it a big leap for some people with a disability, that the hand, even though it wasn't ideal and it didn't allow as much as it perhaps should have, it was almost the disguise element of it was as important as what it did or did not allow you to do. Whereas,
Yes.
you come out and do what you've done, and I presume the hooks that I saw in your video when you were speaking, they're your main appendage that you use, I presume. But they say straight away, this guy doesn't have any hands. So
Yeah.
there's no hiding that. Is that a barrier for some people, do you think?
I think I suspect it is. I mean, it's it's interesting that you say disguise because if you saw these hands, you would probably giggle. But they're not much of a disguise at all. Um, but yeah, I
They're
think
not as stark though as having a hook, which
true.
leaves
Yeah,
nothing to
if
the
you
imagination. This man has
that's
lost his
right.
hands.
You might be able to fool somebody's peripheral vision to an extent, but
Yep.
I think look, there is a marriage that people have to that old version of themselves. There's a sense that it feels normal to have what looks like a hand there. And I understand that that's how people think about it. I'm pretty convinced that that's the sole reason that these things still exist because functionally they're absolutely useless. But I didn't care about that all too much. And when I got used to the hooks, I kind of just really liked the optics of them, and they were really different and cool and it was a case of designing a technology that isn't necessarily going to emulate a hand, but is going to emulate what a hand can do. And
Yep.
that doesn't necessarily look like a hand if you don't have the functionality that hands do with all the individual finger movements and speed and responsiveness,
Yeah.
which these things tend not to. So you've got to think differently about it.
Absolutely. But did you though? And I would imagine you're probably at this stage now, but even back then, were you in the position to see the potential for the prosthetics like the hook that had already been made and see that, hey, if you just tweaked it or just did this for me, this would be so much more effective? Were you soon able to influence what was made and what shape they were made and sort of gear that towards your own needs?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the first thing about putting the hooks on, I realized was I was able to do things much faster than I could with the hands. I could pick up a cup, I could pick up a cigarette, I could do anything that I couldn't do with the hands. And so I kind of fell in love with them quite quickly. But then, learning to become adept with them to the point where it was a fluid appendage, genuinely a part of you, well, it took a few years. And then I guess in the latter part of that time, I started to work out how I could modify them as well to suit my specific needs. Working with prosthetists has been an ongoing process. I mean, to this day, I still change things about it. I just had an Apple Watch built into the left arm.
Wow. Okay.
And I had a bottle opener built into the right arm, which is strange because I don't drink beer, which is usually the thing you open with a bottle opener.
Yeah.
But it's great for a party trick, You're always I've done it in bars as well, when someone's been looking for their bottle opener, and I just lean across and crack it for them, and they're like, "What just happened?"
Tom Nash, who is speaking at the Hidden Abilities event at the Toowoomba Town Hall Annex, which is coming up on June 17. Singer Tom McCallum will be performing, and in fact everyone who is featured as part of this event, right down to the people serving you the food or serving you drinks, have some form of disability. But the message, the purpose of the whole event is that they haven't allowed this setback to define their lives. Being called a performance with a difference. So you'll hear from that man. I was just speaking there with Tom Nash, Tim McCallum, as I mentioned, Dan Ackfield, Evie Heffernan, the Wilsonton State School Signing Choir, and Richie Goodacre. Tickets are $50, which is not a lot when you consider the entertainment on offer and just the experience. So well worth getting along to. It is June 17. You can make a booking. Tickets are only $50 on trybooking.com. If you do a search for Hidden Abilities, that will take you straight to that page where you can grab those tickets. Yeah, June 17. Worth being a part of. 2 to 10.
You're dead, man.